Hey Kevin, how's it going?
Good. How are you doing, John?
I'm doing good. So I had sort of just started because I wasn't sure if anybody was coming, but I'll maybe wait a little bit longer for see if anybody else shows up. I have an extra credit assignment I thought might be fun to throw in if you're interested in doing it, which is to design a font. So I was going to do a demonstration for doing that in Illustrator, and then also using a plugin which is called Fontself to make it into a working font that you can export and then load and use in, say, InDesign or Photoshop or what have you, and
Oh,
type.
okay.
So let me share my screen.
All right.
On the class page for today's class, I've added some links. So one of them is for this template. So the template looks like this, but this is the link that you would use to download it. When you open it, it will look like this. So this is comes from the software plugin Fontself. It's set up with the letter forms here, which are in gray. If you look in the layers in Illustrator, are set up on a template layer. You can tell that because this is a rectangle right here. And if you look at it in outline mode, by doing Command Y, you can still see these elements on the page, even though they're an image. So you could use this as a template. As far as the extra credit is concerned, you don't have to do all of these characters, but I would like you to do the basic Latin character set. So it would be all of the capital letters, all of the lowercase letters, all of the numbers, and then these special characters.
Okay.
I have set up a design just to kind of give you an idea of how to approach it. This design is very kind of loose, and it's just to kind of give you a basic idea of how to approach it. You don't have to use this template quite as literally as this. So I'm sort of tracing it, but making everything with straight lines so that it makes a unique form. But you could draw a condensed typeface. It could be a kind of funky sort of type design. I'll look at some different approaches to creating the letter forms afterwards, but I'll start off by talking about how we use the plugin. Going back to the links on here, so that's that template. That's what it looks like. There's another link here which is to do with using the correct marks. So when you're making some of this stuff, here, for instance, you have the foot mark and the inch mark. And then you also have these quotation marks, which these are most keyboards you have to, and most of the time you'd have to access this with a keyboard shortcut. So the purpose of this is that when you're making these elements and you're putting them into the font, you need to know how to type them as well, because you might need to type them to put them into the font. So there is an article there which shows you what those different marks are. So it talks about the difference between quotation marks or feet and inches. So this is for feet and inches. This is for quotation marks.
Okay.
There's also some talk here about ligatures. So a ligature is where two letter forms are kind of conjoined. This is often the case with like an F and an I, because otherwise the dot on the I tends to run into that teardrop effect on a serif typeface anyway. So there's some different examples of how those might work. The difference between mathematical symbols and so on. So there's just an article about correctness of use, because oftentimes those marks are sometimes used incorrectly. This is the link to the actual software itself. So if you wanted to buy it, you go to get it now. It's $39 to buy the version which is for Illustrator. There's also a version which will work for Illustrator and Photoshop, which is $59. But I can't see a lot of reason to wanting to do it in Photoshop as well. But that might just be that I haven't really thought about using Photoshop as a way to create fonts. Remember that a font really wants to be vector-based, and Illustrator is a vector-based software. Photoshop is a bitmap-based software. But you can create fonts in both Illustrator or Photoshop. If you still want to do this extra credit and you can't afford to buy the software, what I was thinking is that you could do the design using the template that I've provided for you, because the template is actually from Fontself, so you can access that from their panel. But if you have this, you could draw out all of your letter forms that you want to use. And then when you come into the lab, either this Thursday or next Thursday, which will be the last week, you could then make it into a working font from there. Does that make sense?
Yeah. Yeah.
So let me go over how you would use this then.
Okay.
So when you install it, you would install it kind of like most software, except that because it's been installed into Illustrator as a plugin, you'll have to make sure that Illustrator is not open, or if it is open, actually, I think you just have to close it and then reopen it once it's installed. And then once you've installed it, it will show up here under extensions. And what you've added is basically this panel that you can now use to add your font into it. So if I wanted to, I'm going to just save this font. And then I'm going to sort of start from scratch and we'll make a new one. So when you click create new, you can either create a new style. So a new style would be like, let's say you designed one font and then you want to make an italic version, or you wanted to make a bold version of the same font. You could create another style of the same font with this, but I'm going to create a whole new font. So I'll click here. When you're creating a new font, you'll have an empty panel that looks like this one. And we can then add the various aspects into here. Now, when you're drawing this out, the great thing about this template is that it already has all of these guides set up. You can actually access this from here. I believe if you go to font template, this is the same file I'm working on here. There's also a file which is called Welcome Gazette, which, if I zoom out on this, it gives you instructions on how to use it. By the way, this is a fairly recent thing, but with this version of Fontself, you can also make colored fonts like this, not just black and white fonts. That's a relatively new thing. But here it gives you a fairly simple breakdown as to how to go about creating it. I'll upload this as well, actually, if you want, so if you need it. But if you get the software, you'll have this. But let's turn this lettering into a font. So to get started, we take these letters and we add them into here. So I'm going to do it with a different font, but basically you select A through Z, and you'll see up here in the panel that we have A to Z capitals and A to Z lowercase, and then 0 to 9, so all of your numbers from left to right. And then you have a thing for batch. So if you want to add a bunch of characters, maybe the special characters into here, you could add them by batch. If you type into here, you can also add an individual glyph this way. So we'll start off by adding my capital letters. So I've drawn each of these out. As I said, for this particular font, I'm just doing this as a demo, and I've just basically decided I'm going to make a font which is kind of a little bit coarse, kind of almost like a low resolution polygon type font, where everything is straight lines, even the curves. But main reason for me doing it like this was, to be honest with you, is to make something fairly quickly. So this whole font took me a couple of hours or so, maybe 3 or 4 hours to do the whole thing altogether. But bear in mind that there is lots of these elements that you can reuse. So for instance, let's say I've drawn the letter N. The letter H is the same, but with an extended ascender. The letter O is the same as the letter Q. Now, with this particular font, because I want it to be a little bit, feel like it's a little bit kind of handmade, I might actually want to change them a little bit. Anyway, I did actually duplicate the O to make the Q, but it might be better actually for this particular version if I adjusted it slightly. But that may be something that can help save time, is by reusing. There's quite a few of these letter forms that you can reuse. So if you look at like the lowercase letter D, in this particular case is a reverse of the lowercase letter B. The I has been extended to make the J. The L is the same as this downstroke on the K. So you can start using bits over and over again, which will save you time in terms of drawing it, because obviously there's quite a lot of work involved in doing all of these different bits and pieces. So I'm going to select these. You also want to make sure that each of the letter forms, each of those glyphs as they're called, is a contained unit. It's one object. So I'll give you an example of where this gets a little bit complicated. Like on the letter I, for instance, it's made out of two objects, right? But if you combine them by doing object compound path make, Illustrator then sees this as one shape. This is important because when we drag these letter forms in here, like on this one, for instance, the first time I dragged it in, I'd forgotten to do that. And this was a separate shape. So it was like, it was a letter O, which I'd copied. And then I drew this shape over the top of it. And I forgot to combine them together as one shape. In this case, I wouldn't do Command 8 because that would make a hole where they overlap. I would do Unite in Pathfinder to combine them. But if they weren't combined, when I add them in here, it's going to give me a warning. So if I drag across here and select all of these letters and then just drag them into here, you can see that when I drag it into here, this screen changes. And now I can choose all A to Z. Another way you can do it is to simply, oops, let me Command Z that. I can also just click on where it says A to Z right here, and that would also set it in motion. This one's not going to allow me because it has 27 objects instead of 26. Again, that's because I hadn't combined these two shapes yet. So if I combine these as one, now when we select them, click here, it'll add them into my set of fonts. So this starts the process. We can actually type in here to see what it looks like. Now you'll notice that when I type the lowercase letters, it's actually coming out as just a basic monospaced kind of like typewriter font. That's because I don't have my lowercase letters in there right now. If it was all capitals, I could see what my font looks like there. The spacing isn't very good like right now, and we'll talk about that in a second. Then I can select all of the lowercase letters. Again, I've got to make sure that these elements that have the dots on are united or made into a compound shape, I should say. And that also that I have all of those bits selected. I haven't missed it when I'm dragging across to select them. And then I can click on the A to Z on the lowercase letters, and we can add those in. So now I've got my lowercase letters in. Now we could type this in upper and lower and see what it looks like. Now let's take the numbers and we'll add those in. If I then take the period, I could just go up into this area where it says type any character, and I could type a period and then hit create glyph. So I could either do that for all of these other things, or if I wanted to, I could select over them and then choose batch. Now, when I do this, I'm also going to have to go in there and type in each of those individual things. So I think that it's probably just as easy, to be honest with you, to select each one and type it in here, because you're still going to end up having to type it anyway. But that's the process. Then I choose create glyph. If you just want to use it in Illustrator, we can click install. I would give it a name. I'm going to call this demo for 140 and then press OK. So now this is not available for all programs. It's not available for InDesign or Photoshop or anything like that, but it is available in Illustrator now. So if I want to use this in Illustrator, it doesn't have to be in the same file. I can just go ahead and create another document. And then let's see when we start typing with it. So actually, let's drag out a text box. So this is the font now being used. You can see that in certain areas here, it has a box. That means that I don't have all of my characters in there yet. So like maybe it doesn't have the question mark, for instance. Also, the spacing is pretty terrible between the letters. It's a little bit too spaced apart. And also that the kerning settings isn't very good. So the other thing we can do to improve this is if you go to this button that says Smart, this will automatically adjust the spacing and kerning for all the glyphs. So remember that the spacing between the letters is how much space, so it's basically this distance, between each of the characters. The kerning is adjusting for particular characters, so it's making kerning pairs. To do this manually would take hours and hours and hours of work. So this is a great feature that they've added. If I click Smart now, we can adjust how wide. So I'm going to bring the spacing in a little bit. I'm going to make it 60. Let's try 60 and see what that looks like. We can always redo it. So now you can see it's made 64 glyphs optically spaced, 66 kerning groups defined, 566 kerning pairs created. And so let's see if this is adjusted yet. I don't think it's updated yet. I've got to install it first. So install. And then once it's finished installing it again, it will have updated my spacing and we'll be using those kerning pairs. So we could still kern the lettering ourselves. You can work with this now just like any other font. So if I went into this piece of type, for instance, and I put my cursor here, I can still manually adjust the kerning by using Option right arrow or left arrow to adjust the space between letters. So if I wanted to fine tune it like we would in any piece of type, go in and adjust the space between individual characters, we can do this on this font that we've created ourselves now. You can also create outlines like you could with anything. So it's just drawn objects again. So it works just like any other font. So right now we have it available in Illustrator, but I don't have it available for use in other software. So let's say I wanted to use it in other software. I would do save, first of all. And I'm going to save this as demo for 140. .otf is the file extension for the font. And then if I want to use this, then I can go to the desktop and then find where I saved it. So if I go into Documents, my files on Dropbox, go to Teaching, go to Fullerton, go to Week-15. It's not that one, is it? Where did I save it to? Did I save it to the wrong folder? Let's see. Save that again. Oh, I saved it into Mission College, that's right. So if I wanted to load this as a font for other software, let me go back to the folder that's actually in. I put it into the wrong school. Fall 2021, Week-15. So this is the font right here. If I double click on it, On a Mac, it's going to open up in, oh, that's not the right one. This one here. On a Mac, it's going to open up in a program called Fontbook. If it's on a PC, I think it opens up in a different. Do you work on a PC or a Mac, Kevin, usually?
I work on a Mac.
Yeah. What about you, Aldrich? You work on a PC, I think, right?
Yeah, PC.
And when you load fonts, have you ever loaded fonts onto your own computer, like from say dafont.com or something like that, where you've downloaded a font from a website and loaded it?
Yeah, I've done that.
Aldrich, have you done that on a PC?
No, I don't think I've tried that yet.
So I don't know what the software is, I'm afraid, but I think if you double click on the font, it's probably going to open up an equivalent software on Windows computer, and then you'll have the ability to install the font. So this is different from making it available in Illustrator, because now it's available to whichever software I'm in. So whether I'm in InDesign or I'm in Photoshop or I'm in Illustrator or what have you, I can still access that font. You could also give this font to somebody else, give them the file, and they can load it on their computer and use it just like any other font that you do. There are some other adjustments that you could get into fine tuning it. So for instance, if you double click on it, you could adjust, like sometimes you might find that you need to readjust the spacing slightly, the position slightly within here. So you can double click on each individual letter and make fine adjustments to the position of fonts. Does anybody have questions about that? I haven't tried doing a color font, by the way, yet, but this is a new feature. So if you wanted to try doing that, there is another link on the page for today's class, which gives instructions. It is this one here. So this is on their website, how to create a color font with Illustrator. And it goes through the process that this designer used for creating it. There's also a video tutorial here on YouTube that you can watch that goes through the process as well. So the process is going to be pretty similar to doing it in black and white, but traditionally you could only really have fonts that were black and white, and then obviously you can apply color to them. But the beauty of making colored fonts is that you could have a font where the lettering has automatically got particular colors in it. So if you're making a font for a company, for instance, that they can use in various situations, every time they type it out, it would automatically be in the correct colors. I think that's it on that tutorial on the Fontself side. And then the last link I have in here is a blog that they have, which gives you some examples of fonts to use. But if you look through here, the main thing to remember when you're designing these is that the shapes need to be complete shapes. So let me see if I can see as an example here. It doesn't really show it on that, but sometimes, like let's say you're drawing out the shape of a letter form. Like the Q, for instance, I showed you earlier, where it's made out of two pieces. You've got to make sure that those are combined together as one individual thing. I think it was on that other one that I saw a pretty good visual that shows this. Yeah, here. So you can see on this one, this shape here doesn't really work very well. This needs to be combined as one complete shape. So when you look at it in outline mode, it shouldn't be made out of objects like that. It should be one complete shape. Does that make sense? So you can use Pathfinder to unite them together. If it's a stroke that you're using, I would recommend that you outline it. And then it might, like, let's say you did a stroke like this and then another stroke like this. You would outline them first of all, because you won't be able to combine them with Pathfinder if they're a stroke. You need to make them into a fill, and then you can combine it as one shape. Okay.
Okay.
All right. Aldrich, have you gotten much further on your visual identity project?
Let's see. Yeah, I started working on.
I think you were working on the print stuff next, right?
Yeah, I was working on the print stuff. So I have something of the print stuff, and I have something of the.
Of the screen graphics.
Yeah, started the screen graphics.
Okay, awesome. Okay, great. So
Yeah.
next week is the last week. So in this week's class on Thursday, I'd like to kind of really sit with you and try to finish up. It seems like there's only really you two, and I think Harrison's still coming to the Thursday class, although he doesn't seem to come to these meetings. But if we can really push it, just finishing up the visual identity, and then remember, there's also that other final project, which is the posters, which I think Kevin, you've been working on, right?
Yeah.
So have you got very far with the posters?
I'm still working on the last two. I got the Swiss style,
Okay.
and then
And
you know, I have ideas. I've just been doing research, on seeing examples, reading, going through the links, and kind of like just reading up on, the deconstruction, and
yeah.
then
Okay.
trying
All right,
to
cool.
think how to combine those together to make my third one.
All right. And then does it interest you making the font?
Yeah, I have another program that's
For
for creating
font
fonts.
design? Is
Yeah.
it Font Lab?
Yes.
Oh,
Yeah.
okay. Have you used Font Lab previously?
I've not recently,
Uh-huh.
when I did get it, a few years back, playing around with it just to see
hmm
um, about kind of like trying to incorporate like, the hand lettering, like making, script fonts.
Yeah. I mean, you could, even if you wanted to, is you could create a font that would be for your visual identity. You could incorporate it into it if you wanted to. It's not a requirement of the extra credit you do that, but it might be kind of interesting if you're like making a font that fit with your brand, and
Hmm.
then you could incorporate it into the text that you use in the visual identity. The reason I used the Fontself one, I had looked at it. I don't know, maybe about. I'm trying to think now. It would probably have been around about 2016 when I was doing an album cover for this band called Latimer House, and I I decided to do a font for it. Weirdly, I don't know why, actually, exactly why I decided to, but I decided to do like all the liner notes and everything in their own font. So the entire album, the front cover, the liner notes, everything was done in this font, and I used Fontself for it. But the version that I used was sort of like a beta version, and so there was a lot of sort of weird things that I had to fiddle around with to make it really work. The newer version that they have now is a lot more robust. Like that feature where it creates the kerning power, the kerning pairs and so on, is amazing. Because trying to go and do that manually is really tricky. It takes so much time to do that. And then also like the ability to adjust its position on the baseline before was really tricky. Now you can double click on it, you can see it bigger, you can really quite easily move it around. So I don't know, because I haven't used FontLab for years. I had played around with it some time ago, but I can't remember exactly what the difference is. Do you remember much what the difference is, Kevin?
No, but it's been a while, same here, since I've played around in there.
I
Is
think if you are using FontLab, you could I lost my train of thought then. Yeah, I totally forgot what I was going to say. I don't know.
it's all good.
All right, so see if you can get some stuff ready to present on Thursday when we meet in person, and then if you want to play around with the software, I'll bring my laptop in with you so you can play with the Fontself software if you want to try it.
Okay.
And then for your part, Aldrich, do you still need any help with it, or are you okay after the last time we met?
Let's see. There may be some more functions in, I think it's Photoshop.
Okay.
that
Is
I
it on
made.
the, do you want to share your screen?
Yeah, I can do that in a second.
Okay.
I'll find the thing that I mean.
Mhm. Do you have any questions for me right now, Kevin? Or you're okay?
Yeah, I'm okay right now.
Okay. I think you're probably pretty close to being done, right? With all of the projects.
Yeah.
I think
Yeah.
I'm pretty confident you're going to get everything done by next week without any problem.
Yeah, I'm like I said, I'm working on the posters, and
Mhm.
yeah, I'll definitely you know do something for the font, because it's I was interested, like I said, a few years back, so it's kind of
Yeah.
interesting.
Okay.
Something
Cool.
give
I
us
think one of the reasons I have students do this, I actually haven't done it in this class previously, but I've done it in a typography class. And one of the things that's interesting about it is it really kind of forces you to look very carefully at type, and in graphic design, we're oftentimes working with type. So when you're designing the typeface, it really makes you kind of more aware of the details and the shape and what you're considering in terms of the typefaces when you're looking at them.
Yeah, yeah, I definitely know, just like on the poster one, when I was looking at the what kind of sans serif, I'm looking at the e's. I want to see how that, the open, what is it, the open part of the e, just seeing how that
The
shape.
counter.
Yeah, I'm
Uh,
looking at, there's a certain look, I'm just, I like it more of like that teardrop look inside.
oh yeah,
So,
yeah, yeah. Uh-huh.
so yeah, I definitely understand what you mean. Just,
Yeah,
being meticulous on.
it's a very subtle art form. It's almost invisible in some ways. I think that oftentimes when people look at fonts, they kind of feel like they're just there. That they by osmosis there are fonts that you use. I don't
Yeah.
think people always recognize the fact that somebody actually has to sit down and draw out all of those shapes.
Yeah, it is crazy to think that they used to do this by hand.
By hand. Yeah,
Yeah,
it's crazy.
on like pretty much just being like a like an engineer,
Uh-huh.
drafting up plans for a building. They're just like.
Have you ever seen those drawings of Eric Gills where he's drawing out Gill Sans? See if I can find it.
I may have, yeah, because I've it was just something like by doing
Like these
some design.
ones.
Yeah.
I love these. These are like his working drawings, trying to figure out the Gill Sans. So
Okay. Yeah.
this is on graph paper, which in Illustrator. Actually, what I'd meant to do is to do a demonstration for designing letter forms. So what I was showing you there was how to use the template, but also I had wanted to show you how you could. I had done a couple of demos here, I think. What did I do with it? Well, I'll do it again anyway. So I wanted to show you a couple of different approaches to designing letter forms. I may have shown you one of these earlier in the semester, but I don't remember. But if you use the grid structure in Illustrator, so command quotation marks or view and then hide grid or show grid, and then also snap to grid. And then under preferences, if you go to guides and grid, here right now it's set to 72 point, which is 1 inch. So 72 points is the same as 1 inch. And then the subdivisions are 32. I'm going to change this to 8 for right now. That's the default setting in Illustrator, actually, is 8 division, so 1/8 of an inch each of those squares. And then if I do snap to grid, so when I draw shapes into here, it snaps into that system. We could create letter forms in this way by drawing shapes kind of like this.
Yeah.
And then, because one of the things that you want to try to create in a font is a sense of consistency, that they feel like all of the letters go together. And so if you start off with one form like that and then you duplicate it, the letter B could be created out of this by adding another line here, joining it together. I'll take off these extra points that we don't need by using the pen tool. I'll rotate this the other way. Oops, try that again. So I'll rotate this the other way. And then to make it a little bit more like a B rather than a number 8, I'm going to nudge this one in and then draw a rectangle here to just cut off the end of the B. And then if I wanted to make a C, I could take this shape, duplicate it, and with another rectangle, I could cut out the center section. Something like that. By doing minus front. Again, I can get rid of these extra points that I don't need where they were joined together. And then this bit at the top, I could maybe nudge it over. Again, if I nudge it, it's still snapping to the grid. So it's in exactly the right position, so to speak. You don't necessarily, though, when you're creating letter forms with the grid, have to create something that's quite so blocky. So this is sort of based off of De Stijl fonts. De Stijl was a Dutch avant-garde movement, beginning of the 20th century, where everything was sort of based off of rectangles. So if you do De Stijl fonts, this is what they tend to look like. Everything is based off of rectangles. So it's a good way to start, actually, if you just want to just like try playing around with letter forms. But you could make something that's far more complicated than that. You could include curves in it or circular shapes. So one example, this is not quite as complicated maybe, but if I drew a circle here and then drew another one here and then do Command D and then duplicate this down and then do Command D. So Command D, remember, is object, transform, transform again. So it's doing whatever I did last. So if I drag it across and hold Option to duplicate, it keeps duplicating it, and then I get that whole row and duplicate it down. Now if I select the corner ones, and I change those to white, and then I go inside and select all the middle ones, and change those to white, then we would have a 0. And if I duplicate this over here, I could select through these. So actually, let's select it like this. And then eyedropper all of those black. And then I could select through all of these and eyedropper all of those white, except these actually. I'll eyedropper those black. And then I could select through all of these and make them white and so on. So this is another way that you could create a font. It doesn't necessarily have to be circles. It could be polygons or something like that. But it gives you a sort of digital structure for a font. But you could also create curved shapes, you know. So you could have a letter A where we start off with a shape like this, and then we click and drag and create a shape like that. And then we could draw another shape inside of here. To cut that out. And we could draw another shape inside of here. And cut that out. But even with the grid, we can use that as a way to control the curves. Like on this one, for instance, if I click here, remember that these are 1/8 of an inch. So if I drag this to this point right here, this is 1/8 of an inch radius. If I drag it here, this would want to go to these points so that it wraps around equally. So we could also create curves that way. And if you wanted to add thicks and thins, you could also select across a certain area in it and nudge it to change the thickness of the stroke. right now we have this set up where it's 8 subdivisions of an inch. But if I wanted to refine it a little bit, so I'm going to bring this in this way, this way, and I'm going to bring this in this way. The position of where I'm putting the thicks and the thins is not really a random thing. So if you were to choose a font like Garamond, which is a serif typeface, you can see where the thicks and thins. So actually, I should have done my thick on this side, on this one, to be honest with you. So I could readjust that. We can select across here. Bring this back this way, and then take this and go this way. Also, I'm going to go into the grid now and refine it a little bit, make it a little bit smaller. So right now, as I said, it's 8 subdivisions, an 1/8 of an inch. But if I go to Illustrator Preferences, Guides, and Grid, and I change this to, say, 32, it would want to be a number that 8 could go into. So 16, 24, 32, something like that. That way, whatever we've already done is still fitting with the grid. But we could then use that to make more refined adjustments. So for instance, I could add a serif by clicking and dragging here, going down to there. Now, obviously, if I still had a grid that was 8 subdivisions, that serif would be this big chunky thing. It's still pretty chunky actually for a serif, but I can make something which is more refined this way. If I made it, an even smaller grid, I can make it even more refined. We can make duplicates of these objects and reflect them. So if I reflect this one this way, we could put this one on here. Actually have it slightly off for some reason. Let's see. Or this one's slightly off, something slightly off there. But we can make that, we can use this almost like Lego then. So if you make a duplicate of this, and then we make a duplicate of that again, and either reflect it or rotate it this way around. Anytime you want them, then you can just drag it out, hold Option, and move it over. Obviously, ultimately, I'd want all of these shapes to be one. So I can unite it like that, take off any extraneous points that we don't need. And if it was more of an old style typeface, we might want to round these off as well. So it's not quite so hard. And we might also go in and adjust the bottom of the serif. I would have to take off Snap to Grid here and just pull this very subtly up. Now, really this distance, because we want them to be consistent, should be a particular measurement. So, you could measure out how far that is. You might also be able to find a way of like nudging it into position, but we want them to be accurate. We want it to be something which is consistent that we could do over and over again. But you can see that you could get a much more refined kind of letter form by using a more refined grid. But the grid structure is a useful way to get started. Like you can see on those drawings from Eric Gill, he's using that grid paper as a way to define his drawings. He's also using geometry, so intersecting curves to create the shapes, which you can also do in Illustrator. Did you find the files that you were looking for, Aldrich?
Yeah, I have the file.
Okay, cool. You want to share your screen?
Yeah, I'll pull it up right here. So I have this. I was able to
Okay, yeah.
get the color for here. I created shapes through the rectangle tool.
Okay, yeah, cool.
Not sure, wasn't able.
So if you
This
wanted
is
to
a
put an
change?
image,
Okay, change.
yeah. So if
Okay,
you
I
want to
wasn't
change
sure
the
to
color,
change
you
with
can do that.
this section. Okay, I wasn't quite aware of that. Let's see what else I had trouble with. This
Uh-huh.
wasn't showing up well here.
Oh, the logo. Yeah, I can't see it at all actually. So that's to do with the color of your logo, right? Relative to the background color.
Yes. Yeah.
So the other thing I should point out is that are you replacing the logo that they had there?
Yeah, or
Uh-huh. So you're using, yeah, exactly. So one of the things that I should point out is that just because you're using that template, it doesn't necessarily mean that you have to use exactly what's there. So if you go back to the template a second,
this one
close this one actually.
over
Yeah,
here.
go on that one, yeah. So on here, like where your logo is, you could maybe have it be bigger, so you could scale it in here.
Okay.
But the image that you're bringing, because it's very small, it's kind of pixelated. So it might be better to just place it again, to bring it in from your Illustrator file, and then place it into here as a smart object, so that if you want to change it, you can double click on it and it'll take you back to the logo. So do you know how to do that?
I think so. Yeah. So open it up in here. You mean?
Open up the logo in Illustrator to begin with, because that's where you've got it.
Okay. Right. I have to go find that one. Would I go open it up? Would I export it? Would I copy and paste it?
You can copy and paste it actually. Yeah.
Okay.
And then when you paste it, it's going to ask you how you want to paste it. So if you want to paste it so that it's editable, you don't necessarily have to do this. Like if you've decided this is the way the logo is going to be, you could just paste it as is, as pixels. But if you paste it as a smart object, it means that if you double click on that layer, it will take you back to the Illustrator file, which will be stored in your libraries. And you can then edit it if you needed to.
All right. So I'm going.
And then I have a question for you on the areas where you have the product name and the price. Were you thinking of putting images into those places?
Yeah, images.
So do you know how to make it stay inside that square? Like if you brought an image into that place, do you know how to make it stick in that square?
Is that one of the functions?
I'll show you on here. I think it's probably easier than trying to explain it.
Yeah, I feel like you might have shown me that before.
I think I did show you before, but basically what I would suggest you do is place it above that layer. So if you click on it with auto select layer, so it takes you to that layer. And then, so go to file new, web. I think it's this one that you're using, isn't it? So I know that you've changed it and you've put squares in here. So I'll change this one a little bit. I'll take off these. So up here it says auto select layer. So now if I click on this one, it will take me to that layer. And I'm just going to turn this one off. And then let's just put a box in here. So I'll use a vector shape layer like you did, and create a rectangle for where the image is going to be. And then let's take the curves here down to 0. Didn't work, did it? Try that again. Why am I not able to do that? Let's pull this in. Okay, so you've got a shape for where you want to put your image. I think you have it as kind of like a light yellow color, but whatever it is, you've got a colored shape, right? For that to be for the position for your image. And then if you bring an image in, so I'll just grab sort of any image. Let's say I take this one here and copy it. If I wanted it to show up in here, I can paste it above it. And then I could clip it to it. So if I hold Option and click on the line that separates these two layers, so I click right there. Now it doesn't matter how big this is, it will only show up within that space. Does that make sense? So you can move it around inside of there, but it'll only show up where you have that rectangle that you've created. So with all of your product stuff, if you get your photographs, you can just put them above those rectangles and then clip them to them so that it'll all fit to the correct size and so on. Okay.
Okay, so you so you copy and paste the image.
Yeah, I copied and pasted the image
into the layer,
and I pasted it right on top of it. So I had that layer that's got the shape, the square, selected, so that the next thing I paste will paste right above it, directly above it. So that way I just have to Option click or Alt click in your case, because you're on a PC. Hold Alt and click on the line that separates the layer that has the image and the layer that has the shape, and that creates what's called a clipping group. Okay.
got it.
All right. Was there anything else that, from a technical point of view, on that stuff that you needed help with?
Let's see. So I pasted in the logo from a small size. It looks nice. The bigger it gets, I think the more pixelated it gets. No?
Let me share your screen a second.
Let's see. Oh, okay. No, it's
when you're actually scaling it. So if you've pasted it and you're dragging it out with the bounding box, it actually looks more pixelated than it really is. And then when you apply it, because I think it's to do with like having to re-render it all the time as you scale it. So it does it as a sort of low resolution version. And then once you apply it, it'll snap into its real resolution. So is that what was happening? You think maybe?
Yeah, that's what's happening.
Okay. All right, so I think I'm going to end it for right now, and then I'll see you guys on Thursday. Keep working at it, and then maybe on Thursday we can cram and get everything sort of finished up in person on your visual identity. And I'll take a look at your posters on Thursday as well, Kevin. Okay.
All right.
All right. Very good. See you guys. I'll post the video later on.
All right. Have a good night.
All right.
Thank you.
You too. Thanks. Bye.